ahead. And welcome to part two of Wisconsin Democracy Campaign's Big Money Briefing. This is a three-part series where we're looking at spending in the past April election. And then we will wrap up in July with the finalized numbers. A little bit about Wisconsin Democracy Campaign. We're a nonpartisan organization leading to get money out of politics. We have a publicly available database. It's our 30th anniversary this year. Yay. And our website is wisdc.org. And we also do other efforts to strengthen democracy here in the state, like fair maps, voting rights, and things such as that. All right, and we have quite a bit on the agenda for today. So we're going to do a quick April debrief. We're going to go over state Supreme Court spending, superintendent spending. Like I mentioned, final numbers, like the most finalized numbers won't be available until early July, but we have a pretty good sense of the spending, the very, very high spending that went on this past election. We also have a new statewide money in politics poll that is a really interesting look at the attitudes of Wisconsinites when it comes to money in politics and various issues such as transparency as well as different reforms. So we'll talk a bit about disclosure, issues with PACs, as well as things such as public financing as ways to fix our money in politics problems here. And then we also have Tom Thoresen, a retired Wisconsin conservation warden. Tom is going to talk with us a bit about his experience and his advocacy, and doing so to connect the big money problem to actual issues such as environmental protections and illustrate that, it's not just an abstract issue, or it's not just an issue that affects us during election season, but something that affects our everyday lives, such as like the water we drink and where we live. And then we will wrap up with questions. And with that, I will pass it over to our research director, Sam.
Awesome. Thanks, Molly. As Molly mentioned, my name is Sam. I'm the research director at the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign. I'm going to go over a brief overview of the numbers that we now understand. So first, looking at the state Supreme Court race, where the winner was ultimately Susan Crawford. So she spent, according to the March numbers that were filed a couple of weeks ago, around 22 million. These numbers are approximate. If people want the exact cents, we are happy to send that to you. And Schimmel, who lost this election, spent about 9.9 million. All in together, they spent about $32 million. And then looking at outside spending, so independent expenditures, so these are things that are not coordinated with the candidates, but outside groups will spend to try to influence voters to vote the way that these groups would like. So looking at independent expenditure spending totals, we see it's a little bit over $51 million. Independent expenditure spending for pro-Schimmel and anti-Crawford, advertisement, canvassing, that sort of thing, was right around 33.5 million. And then for pro-Crawford, anti-Schimmel independent expenditure spending, we saw that right a little bit under 18 million. And these numbers are recent as of this morning. And then just for our visual learners, this graph is very daunting when we look at over time, and this is with inflation adjusted independent spending in our state Supreme Court races in Wisconsin. So 2025 was by far the most expensive race in our state's history, and I believe in country's history, for what was spent on a state judicial election, which is just really, really crazy to look at the millions of dollars pouring into our state to try to elect a nonpartisan judge. And then just giving a little bit more of some context. Again, these numbers are as of this morning. So looking at what was spent 6 days out, when we look at our reports from 2023, to 6 days out from this election, we see an increase of about 125% in independent expenditure spending. For candidate spending, we're still seeing an increase. It's a little bit lower, but right around 56.5% increase looking 6 days out of since the election. Now, moving over to the superintendent race, a lot of attention was paid on the state Supreme Court race, but we know there was also millions of dollars pouring into this election as well. Looking at independent expenditure spending totals, as of this morning, they're right above 2 million spent on this election. A lot of that going to pro Underly anti-Kinzer. As we know, Underly won this election, and independent expenditure spending for pro Underly related ads and efforts was about 1.9 million. Looking at pro Kinzer, anti Underly, independent expenditure spending, we're seeing that right around 160,000. Looking at what the candidates themselves spent and fundraised, total all in, it was about $2.4 million that these two candidates spent on their campaigns. Underly is pretty evenly matched in terms of what she spent. It's right around the 1.3 million, and then Kinzer is resting at spending right around 1.1 million. And as Molly mentioned, these are what we know as of now. There's going to be more reports filed at the state and at the national with the Elections Commission in July. So these numbers are likely going to grow. Also, we are collecting issue ad information, and so those numbers also bump up the total of what is spent in these elections. A lot of that is not calculated. At Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, we tend to be conservative and we don't want to count numbers until we have final invoices and until contracts have been filled. So these numbers will likely just increase as we're getting new files, but also as invoices are being filled. So definitely, if you're interested in getting the final of what this election ended up costing, what outside groups and what candidates spent, please come back and on July for our third briefing. And with that, I will pass it off to our executive director.
Hey everybody, Nick Ramos. I have he, him pronouns. I am the executive director of the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign. This current slide that you're looking at right now is a snippet from a press release that we shared with the public last week. And it's with the view of this amount of spending, looking at just the doubling of the amounts of money that has come in for a 10-year seat on a nonpartisan Supreme Court. And I had bit of a, I guess, Debbie Downer negative take in that if we're looking at just the money purely and not just talking about elections, results, any of that stuff, this issue cuts across Republicans, Democrats, independents alike. And that if there isn't any substantive campaign finance reform that is coming here in the state or even at the federal level, that we are really seeing right now a preview of what is to come for just not Wisconsin, but the rest of the country. It is an environment where billionaires are running the show, and everyday people like you and me are here watching this, what I called a billionaire arms race. And so, I want, especially when we start to talk about some of these later slides, to just think about the fact that we will continue to see unprecedented spending unless something changes from our legislature and our lawmakers. Next slide. And so what we here at the Democracy Campaign want to share with the media and with the public, we, in the middle of February, we launched a statewide poll that I'm going to be able to dive deeper into. And for folks that are either here on the live call or reviewing this video feed after the fact, we are sharing with you all the poll results and the memo that comes with it to explain the numbers, but I wanted to get into some of the just big picture items that I think is good for the public to understand and see in real time as far as this current issue with money in politics. And so I'm going to go and talk about some of these top line things here now. So a lot of times we get to hear from people throughout the state with the work that we do here at the Democracy Campaign. And it's nice to have these anecdotal stories about what money in politics means for the everyday person, but to have real data to be able to explain really what is the mood and what is the perspective of our electorate here in Wisconsin. And so we ran a statewide poll over 800 samples cutting across demographics and political ideations. And one of the biggest takeaways is that 88% of Wisconsin voters statewide are extremely concerned or very concerned about the influence of money in politics. And this, I mean, we are at the doorstep of 90%. 90%. Can you imagine something that people agree with universally that is this pungent as money in politics? I have a hard time thinking of an issue that has this kind of universal feedback across the state. And yet, doesn't matter age, political party, people are concerned legitimately. And I think after seeing the gaudy amount of money that was spent in this Supreme Court race, I can only imagine that this number and this percentage is going to increase. Let's go to the next slide. Another big takeaway that we got from this poll is the fact that Wisconsin voters overwhelmingly support policies that are intended to curb the influence of money in politics. 86% of respondents oppose individuals and organizations being able to spend unlimited amounts of money in support of campaigns. And only 8% of respondents believe that voters have the strongest influence on elected officials. Next slide. As far as just some of the solutions that we have understood as fixes to the broken campaign finance system that we live under right now, we presented some of these solutions to the surveyees. And just want to walk through some of the big ones. One, disclosures. 53% of people, so more than half, are concerned about dark money PACs who do not have to disclose their donors when it comes to the influence of money in politics. Something that in this race and in the other races that we've seen take place in Wisconsin, it is a real issue that the electorate is intimately aware of, and showing you that more than half of the folks that we were able to survey, they acknowledge this. As far as just this wild and fast and looseness when it comes to just PACs, 74% of people would support a ban on campaign spending by outside political action committees, otherwise known as PACs. When it comes to public funding and thinking about public campaign finance reform, something that this state had for a couple of years from 2009 to 2011 when it came to the very Wisconsin Supreme Court that was on the ballot here on April 1st. 47% of people would support a publicly funded campaign financing program in Wisconsin. So nearly half of the surveyees that we were able to reach out to, they are on board with doing something in the realm of public campaign finance reform here in Wisconsin. And when it comes to uh, folks that are in the legislature or elected officials that are buying and selling stocks, 86% of people would support a ban on elected officials buying and selling stocks in individual companies. And so I just want to say that, like, looking at the future and some of the things that we believe that could remedy the issues that we're dealing with here on the ground in Wisconsin, the electorate is very aware of the problem and is very aware of some of the solutions, and actually want to see some of these solutions be implemented here in a state like Wisconsin. Next slide. And with that, I want to take some time to be able to talk about the man, the myth, the legend, Tom Thoresen, who is here with us today. And I wanted to be able to give some just actual, a real living, breathing person that, like, we spend so much time talking about the issues of money in our elections, how it dilutes the voices of the people. But at the end of the day, money in politics, that problem, it has an impact on policy and it is tangible. And it's something that when we think about issues like healthcare reform, tribal rights, gun control, all issue areas that are often facing opposition by big businesses and corporate interests. So with that, like today we have Tom. He is a retired Wisconsin conservation warden to talk about the connection between big money and conservation efforts here in Wisconsin. Tom, the floor is yours, good sir.
Well, thank you so much, Nick. I really appreciate all of the things that Democracy Campaign does, and I believe in your mission because I have seen firsthand how money robs us of our equal voices, and it also really diminishes our protection of our public health and natural resources. As some background, I'm a lifelong Wisconsin resident. I was lucky, grew up in Waukesha. My dad did uh, really impress on me how we needed to have clean government. And he was a big advocate of the LaFollets, especially fighting Bob and his sons, Phil and Robert Jr. Um, I went to school at UW Eau Claire, and then I was lucky enough to get a job in the Capitol, working for the Assembly, first Sergeant at Arms, and then full time at the Chief Clerk's office. I bring this up because in the 1970s, it was a much cleaner time, a lot less money in politics. And I think there was a much better representative of people working together for the right solutions. So I was able to have that experience. In 1979, it was actually my second time, I wrote the civil service test to be a conservation warden, and I was hired. And after a year of training, I spent 5 years as a field warden, then as a law enforcement safety specialist. And then in 1985, they created a position called the environmental warden, which was a job that investigated deliberate criminal activity of deliberate pollution, either that or complex violations of our environmental laws. Then I took the job as a lieutenant here in Madison, the supervisor, and in 1989, George Meyer and Buzz Visadny hired me to be the deputy division administrator for enforcement. So I kind of went through a long period there in history, but I think it's important because it gives me a background to see what had happened, especially early on in my career. We were taught about, because we knew the DNR was an independent agency focused on, making sure that we use science and that we wouldn't have undue political influence. I don't know if you can see, this is, something that's kind of built into most DNR people that, hey, we need to be doing the right thing for the public. And that was Haskell Noyes and Aldo Leopold, William Aberg, starting in the late 1920s, we had this independent system that was reinforced in 1967, Governor Knowles, when the DNR was created, to have a board so that you didn't have undue political influence, natural resources management. So my first 16 years at TNR, there was never any political interference. In 1993, George Meyer became secretary of DNR, but in 1995, there was a major change in state government where Governor Thompson made the DNR a cabinet position. And that really started some really negative changes in state government. The administrator, when John Fryatt left, his replacement was a person that George was forced to take, who had no experience at all. And it really showed that here you have an influence. This is the cronyism system from years ago. And I'll read, because the very first year I had to do the bureau director evaluations, told him how to do it. And I said, you know, Dave, you need to do mine now. And he says, and he actually, and I'm really grateful for this evaluation because it just showed how clear political patronism and cronyism is that, you know, most Wisconsin people don't want. He wrote, this employee has been faced in the past year with supporting a fresh division administrator who arrives with virtually no knowledge of the agency or its issues. And I use that because it really got to be very frustrating for those at DNR because of political interference on issues to take care of donors. One of those, an example of that was with the Department of Transportation and the road builders, where there was a double standard of how it was being enforced once the political interference came in. I have in front of me a letter that Joe Ryder, who was an excellent field warden in Lincoln County, wrote, who pointed out the double standards. In the late 90s, he wrote one contractor for violating, ruining a stream, and the person was brought into court and fined. A year later, DOT was at it, and he wasn't able to bring the prosecution forward because of the political interference. And as he stated in his letter, he lost credibility with the people there in the court because they knew that was a double standard, and that's you know, simply not right. During this time period, I was actually doing double duty as the deputy division administrator and as a section chief, and I did that until, let's see, I was deputy chief from 2002 until I retired. But after I retired, I wanted to, you know, because I had seen these cases of when you have political appointees and the switch to being cabinet, that you ended up with political interference that affected people's health and our natural resources. One of the other things that happened after DNR became a secretary, the public at the spring conservation hearings knew that, you know, Leopold and Aberg Noyes were correct, and that we should have an independent agency that is free from undue political influence. When Jim Doyle was the Attorney General, he supported it. In 2002, when he ran for governor, and again in 2006, said he would support an independent agency. However, unfortunately, in 2009, and I'd like to really give a lot of credit to Democracy Campaign, because you did this press release that said Doyle's DNR flip-flopped, attuned to big contributors. And you folks were able to, you know, show that, oh, wait a minute, Jim Doyle took over $4 million from people who didn't want an independent DNR, where it was only 17,000 from those who did. So the influence of big money in the flip-flop is pretty clear. So Doyle vetoed that when it did pass. And these documents that I used, I did use in my testimony back in 2007, 2009 on an independent DNR. In 2011, when Walker and Stepp came in, things even got dramatically worse. One of the things that changed in all of state agencies was that you now had political appointees as the public information officer, the chief attorney, and the legislative liaison. Then what also happened at DNR is enforcement dropped off significantly, which was because of the push to not take enforcement and take care of donors. Some of that was reported in the papers already. Here's because I stay connected to people in the field. This is a case that was given to the EPA because nothing happened at Wisconsin DNR. It was Maynard Steel out of Milwaukee. It was where Scott Walker kicked off his recall campaign, and the people who owned the company were Walker donors, and the DNR, Wisconsin DNR, did nothing. Civil servants made sure it went to EPA, where the EPA made them get in compliance, and they were given forfeitures for their violations. The other thing that was a major problem, and this kind of really shows where it hits home, is that positions weren't filled under Walker and Stepp. The environmental warden positions, which I had mentioned I had taken back in 1985, there were vacancies, and the money was there. They should have been filled. They should have been doing the work, because here's the justification for these positions. These positions protect public health and safety for Wisconsin citizens through investigation of criminal and complex violations of environmental laws. These positions are integral in organizational effectiveness, serving and meet the department's objectives of protecting public health, ensuring clean air, land and water, and protecting fish and wildlife habitats. These positions also help provide a level playing field for the many Wisconsin businesses who do comply with the laws. And then it showed, and this went on for years where they didn't fill them, even though the funding was there, which is, in violation of the legislature who actually approved the funding. The other democracy campaign that press release that really covered this, and it kind of shows, and that was that Walker has 42 million reasons to reduce pollution enforcement. And again, it's because of the money and taking care of donors. The Wisconsin Wildlife Federation called attention to this problem when you have such a dramatic drop in enforcement that protects the public health. They did a press release in 2016. And one of the things that they say in that is about, is it the Attorney General or is it the the DNR? Well, in reality, it was both. Because I think one of the things I'd like to kind of finish off with here is that the money in politics, the Attorney General at the time, Brad Schimmel, this is in 2016, and this is again another democracy campaign press release that points out that Schimmel took 2.2 million from WMC and Farm Bureau, whatnot, and they ended up, he then gave a favorable opinion to them on a cumulative impact withdrawal. And DNR attorneys, DOJ attorneys said, well, that's not the law. DNR has a responsibility to make sure lakes, streams, rivers don't dry up. And unfortunately, there wasn't the permits were given to people who shouldn't have had them, and the law was correctly interpreted by the conservative Supreme Court in 2021, saying, yeah, DNR, you do have to protect our waters. That's a constitutional issue. It was a public trust issue, but it showed how, I bring this issue up because it showed how politicians may be influenced to not do the right thing when the law is clear if it benefits them and their donors. So, again, I'd like to thank, in closing, I'd like to thank Democracy Campaign. You do a tremendous job. It's crazy, the money in politics that's out there, and we do need to address this. And in this case, I wanted to kind of show how it affects public health and protection of our natural resources when you have money and you have the politicians, basically pulling the strings. So thank you once again.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Tom, and thanks for all your work. And with that, we'll go to questions. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to use the hand raise icon or throw it in the chat and we can read it out loud. And we'll also be sure to include all of the links we dropped in the chat. We'll make sure those are linked somewhere on the slides.
Yeah, I can take that, Molly. Hey, Abigail. So the question is, could you share the methodology of your polling on campaign finance? How many people were surveyed? And did y'all do it yourselves? And what was the margin of error? So I'm going to, hold on. I mean, I can answer some of these right now. As far as the survey data, I believe it was 800. Hold on. I got it right here. So 861 samples statewide from February 11th to February 14th, 2025. We hired Blueprint Polling to do the poll statewide. Um, Margin of error is plus or minus 3.34. And as far as like just the surveyees and some of the demographic information. We had a mixed bag. It was as far as age, 10% was 18 to 29, 12% was 30 to 39, 13% was 40 to 49-year-olds, 31% was 50 to 64, and then 34% of the people that took the survey was 65 or older. And then when it came down to gender backgrounds, you had 47.5% male, 51.3% female, 1.2% non-binary. And then as far as race demographics, 6% African American or Black, 1% Asian American or Pacific Islander, 86% Caucasian or white, 3% Hispanic or Latino, 1.5% multiracial, 2.5% other. And then as far as just education, well, and all of this was in the poll, but what was your highest level of education? 15% was high school or less, 47% some college, 23.7% four-year degree, 14.3% graduate degree, such as master's, PhD, or MD. And then when it came down to just in terms of politics, what do the people who took the survey, what do they consider themselves as? 31.2% Democrat, 36.8% independent, 31.9% Republican. And then just the last bit of it, in most elections, what party do you typically support? Surveys said 30.1% Republicans, 36.5% Democrats, 22% both parties equally, and 11.4% neither party. And so I hope that answers the question as far as some of the demographical background. And then, yeah, answer the other questions. But yeah, I can answer anything additional. Do you have link to full poll results? Yes. So I believe in the package that we're getting ready to email out in the presentation at the top, there's a part that says links to the poll, and you're going to get the recording and all this information so you can go run through it. And if you have additional questions, we can answer them.
Thanks for that question. Anything else? Tom, you have a question?
Yeah, I know it's not really why it's a comment I forgot to make, which I think is really important, and that is when I confronted about the double standard on the DOT enforcement, the political appointee said, "Didn't I understand that the road builders were the donors?" And of course I did understand that. It was just DNR's job was to keep the rivers and the streams clean.
Thanks, Tom. All right. Well, we will be following up with the recording, the slides, the poll, and all of the various links in the chat. And my contact information is up on the screen if there are any other questions or anything we didn't cover today that you want to talk about. And thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you. One quick question that I had, if you're still there, do you have all the association of states who do the same thing as we do here in Wisconsin Democracy Campaign?